all, thank you very much for being here today in this room. Thanks for the organization, especially to Roman, for inviting me to participate here in this edition of the Congress, which is it's a real honor for me to be here. In this case, it makes sense that I'm in an event like this. In other occasions, it was like weird because it would be weird for me to fit in some of the sessions, but now there's a session. There's a reason. It's not this what's representing me, but it's what this is what didn't let me fit into this kind of congresses. However, this is my CV. It's very short. I talked the presenter just to let me say just a slide to explain that since October last year, I'm the president of Asociación de Internautas. This is my professional career, always related to technologies, seen from law and rights, but also from the approach of the activism, civil society activism. I'm entered in the association in 2006, and last year I became the president of this Asociación de Internautas. It was a fair association. I'm always been trained in law, but always related to technology, and this is from 2001 when I did my master's degree on computing law. That's what's the name at the moment. When I talked to Roman about what I could do, I just posed this opportunity about women and talent. Roman loves this subject, and I love it too. But when talking to Tyson, Texas, David Melendez, maybe it was not a very good idea. So I said, and I don't understand why. Because technology and women is very trendy. We're always fighting on Twitter and internet. So if you invite me, I will need to say something. And if I'm talking about web surfer, I need to say something. On the one hand, I wasn't allowed, and the other hand, I wasn't willing. It's not a problem. I have my opinion, of course, but it's not my mission today here, and it's not my sense of life. We're here to talk about web surfers, the Asociación de Internautas. It's like to make a monographic history about Asociación de Internautas, what's the sense, and what has seen its use since it started 20 years ago. Asociación de Internautas started with this goal. I don't know if you have heard about this flat rate. It was a very difficult battle for many years, and there was no way to connect to internet with a minimum quality and an affordable price. We were like many years behind Europe, and in 1998 there were many people who were angry about this because of not having quality internet at home. They just start moving. Not only the Asociación de Internautas, this association comes from this platform of people who were concerned about this internet connection. Those were the first steps to get this flat rate. 1996, this fallen telephone strike in 1997. In 1998, there was another strike, which was a second falling phone strike. And in that year, it was this association was founded with a real entity. One of the important facts of this association was the commission of computing networks of the Senate. This is the previous president, the motor of this Asociación de Internautas over all this time, the person who has fostered big campaigns that we will see now, but also the everyday's work of everyone who participated in the association in an altruistic manner, because we participate in all the actions that we have, but we will see now, in an altruistic way, free of charge, flat rate, 24 hours, 3,000 pesetas, which is like 30 euros. We have the history going on to see the news that we publish at the moment since 1998 until now, every month, which news were published in the webpage. And reading the first 4 or 5 years, it was very funny because I'm talking about my grandparents' side, but it's not my grandparents, it's our time. It's not our parents' time, it's our time. But there are some millennials around here, but maybe are out of league. But it was difficult to achieve a good quality internet. There were many battles at the moment, but there were more news on the table. We're talking about 1998, 1999, 20,000 computers infected in one day. Right, Melissa? European norm was to just wire some telephones that do had some problems here in Spain. Internauts will be able to reject non-desired email. We were started to talk about spam. Spam was even blocked email addresses. That's what's led us to the actual law regarding e-commerce. We started with our lawsuits. We started fighting through the social media or in the street with strikes. But we also filed some cases in the courts. Our president forces the government to use internet for electronic commerce. What a sentence nowadays! Can you imagine this in a strike, for instance? That was on 1999. The penetration of internet is 5% less than half, all compared to European Union. There yesterday was approved the free access in the Boletín Oficial del Estado. El Mundo, the newspaper, dedicated a whole page to that. In 1999, it was like that. Madridian people were the ones who accessed more to the networks. 26% of purchasers use electronic commerce. Today, it would be like 98% of buyers using e-commerce. The Community of Madrid, 24% of the internet users of all Spain were concentrated here in Madrid. We have to understand that at the time, this internet access in rural areas was completely unthinkable. I could even found companies using more and more internet and less mobile phones.
That was also striking. Internet, true internet for everybody. That was requested in 1999. Only 18% of homes have computers. And this is not so long ago. It's really not so long ago. And there was another news item saying that at the time, in 2001, 55% of high school teachers hadn't used a computer ever. So ADSL for free starts in United States. And until 2003, 2004 wasn't real and efficient. And this is a news item from last year in June because due to the death of our president who became ill in April and finally died in June. And he was the engine of our association, but not only that, he is the engine behind many of the possibilities of network access we have and cybersecurity. We can fit everything within the same file, and also digital rights, because he was talking about all of this since 1998, and throughout all this time he has made very important campaigns, very powerful campaigns, and for instance, about the name of our association, Internauta, which is surfer, and the dictionary of the Royal Academy, the Spanish dictionary, didn't even accept this term internauta or internet traveler or internet surfer. So we had to struggle for that. We finally started existing in 2000. This is in 2015. So it's really surprising that the term wasn't there until 2015. So now there's the term cybernaut or cibernauta, but we didn't only fight for this term, but also hackers, because for a long time, in 2014, we were fighting so that hackers does not mean sort of criminal, and I've actually had to defend that we should use the word hacker as an expert, a computing expert, and when I used the words to crack a system, they were already worrying. And so how are we seeing we in our association? Which are the battles where we've been more, where we've been noisier. Sometimes it's been accepted that we were right, and sometimes they did not acknowledge that we were right, but we produced changes nevertheless. So at the beginning, we started working for flat rates, and we talked about the contracting of internet bonds, and we had incredible fights against Telefonica, and they agreed, the Committee for Telecommunications Market agreed that we were right, but they wouldn't give us what we were asking for. Then the viruses and the need to inform users, and this is already 2000. We were claiming that the government had to inform citizens about viruses, and because users were completely ignorant about these dangers, these risks. Rural technology. This was another battle that still stays, because although the legislation says that there should be universal internet access, that's still hasn't materialized in the rural areas. Later on, in 2002, 2001, we demand that children, unemployed people, and retired people should receive training on computer as computer users, and now we see the consequences of the resistance to that approach, because there are legislators who do not have enough knowledge and therefore are unable to legislate in the right way, and we had to resort to not only strikes, but also to another of our fights was a universal access to bandwidth, and we demand that what should be compulsory to offer 1 mega. Then the role of parents in sort of serving with their kids. We were already claiming that parents should get involved with their kids as they serve. And we also worried about free software, and we were pushing and advocating that the state should be using free software. Yesterday, I had a phone call for an interview saying that kids are using Google in internet in the school, and they're being spied, etc. So cybersecurity, what were we asking for at those times? Well, we were saying that companies were making small investments in computing security. And this is 20 years ago, and nothing has changed in the meantime. With all the progress, the technical progress that has taken place, and how easy it is to access software, that you have to pay for, but that you can update and thus avoid security problems. So we've been campaigning about information campaigns about the risk of viruses and security. What your job is about really in this context. We also disseminated the alarms about fake news, and this is 2002 already. We had what we called Alert Vir, which was an alarm for viruses, and to let companies know when their corporate identity was being used to commit crimes or identity thefts in Hotmail. With all of this, we were doing it 20 years ago, and we're still facing up the problem that people are unaware to realize that the email they've received does not come from their bank. How about the legislation? Well, I can talk about how we participated in the electronic commerce law. We could not understand that spam should be illegal, and we were negotiating with the Senate and the lower chamber to be able to talk about the responsibility of safe service providers for the contents that they were hosting. And we reached a balanced agreement. We wanted more, but if we had known then, this is 2003, 2004, what was going to happen with the copyright directive, we would have been desperate, because the issue of responsibilities is messier, and I don't care how internet works and how much decision making they can make. You are responsible, because I cannot stop this. So this is what we have found in the last 2 years with this copyright directive. The use of email at work, because this was a problem, because there were no policies about how to use these technologies, and the first rulings were coming out, and it was all trial and error, where either the employees or the employers misbehaved, and through this trial and error problem, the problem was clarified and finally regulated. So we manage, well, not on our own, but we certainly were a contributing factor in these debates. And one of the last campaigns is the one to do with data protection legislation, because political parties can trace our data through social networks and thus segment us to send us the advertising that better suited our views. So what are the big milestones? Well, if I talk about canon, the sort of digital tax and Bundesrat, all of you will have heard about this. I can't say that this digital tax was our single success, because there were lots of parties against that measure, because we did not want to be blamed for acting as pirates for whatever reason. Whenever I used the technological device, I had to pay taxes, as though we all were creators with no right to create, because we were only sort of breaching the copyright of other creators. And it was an absurd process, and sometimes we were finally told to be right, and in some cases we weren't. We were the first ones to bring out reports about hoaxes, which we now call fake news, but the name that the European Union uses is misinformation. So what we're fighting against is the information about those news items that falsify reality in order to manipulate. So I've also emphasized this one, 902, because this is something that we did not achieve. We had a big fight so that the customer service was not done through 902 phone numbers, because you had to pay for those, and the national audience or the national court ruled against us. And sometimes our fight meant that at least there was an alternative number, a 911, where you didn't have to pay to get that service or access to consumers' associations. And I don't know if you remember that situation where the conversation had been interrupted, and they called back again, and then you would continue the conversation through a different line. It was quite incredible. Telephone companies who were switching the customers between each other without informing customers. So, and this was what we call slamming, and we also fought against it. This is the news item about CITEL, this system for legal interceptation of communications used by the police to hook our telephones, and we went against this legislation. First of all, because it didn't have sufficient quality. This is a sort of a technical point. The fundamental right, we have a fundamental right to a secret of our communications, and we have to regulate that. And this is part of the executive power, who can sort of ignore the regulation and tap our phones. And we went against it, and we were told we were not wrong, because if you didn't need the judge to use or study traffic data. But we were also talking about the right to privacy, because those traffic data are a breach of our privacy if they're used without the court order. And there is a special vote in that resolution, and thanks to that, the courts have changed their mind, and it is of course taken for granted that the collection of traffic data breaches our privacy, because you know at what time I call, whom do I call, and for how long we talk, and that with data analysis can give you a very good profile of each one of the users. But at the time, and this is 2019, the Supreme Court ruled against us. And then piracy. Everybody has called us pirates, and there was no way in which we could explain that the law didn't understand how links worked or how we worked when we used technology. They didn't want to understand that it was not so bad for them, for instance, with this digital tax. So our association says that we shouldn't criminalize the links due to intellectual property. So the uploading and downloading of content cannot be, you cannot ask the service providers to keep an eye on everything that's uploaded or downloaded 24 hours a day. And the problem is that they are not aware of how it works and how the technology works, and they legislate without understanding. I have to understand that I can have links in my web page, and the content of the pages we link to may have changed afterwards without me having to know about it. So I do not have control of what happens in somebody else's domain, and the legislators do not understand this when they are forcing Telefonica to supervise what's hosted, what's in every web page that they have links to. So the legislator was unable to understand that the owner of a domain couldn't hold watch. Couldn't keep watch of the contents in all of the pages we have links to. Because how can I decide whether the content in somebody's pages is legal or illegal? So as soon as the case goes to court, I can sort of remove that content as a precautionary measure. And there were many examples of rulings where issues saying that this is clearly a crime because it goes against the good name of somebody. Well, and then later on we saw how in those cases it was actually part of the freedom of expression, because we are so there were contradictory rulings, and we decided that we could not criminalize what was going on. But now, thankfully, technology ignores this senseless legislation. But this committee for intellectual property that we have has, at the end of the day, ended up assuming or accepting that we were right. And the famous digital tax, this is the Intellectual Properties Association that had so much money to distribute. I don't want to go onto this topic in too much depth, but as you will remember, these were many years fighting about music and pirates and whether you are represented me or not. So you can imagine. However much we can say that in the street, we had to take this to court, and so we did. And in our case, the Spanish court said we were right. In the European Union, somebody else took the same idea to court. A woman that had a shop and took this to the European court, where it was ruled indeed that she didn't have to pay that tax. But finally, 2008 ministerial order was that was ruled out, but because of without going into the crux of the matter, but just because of a procedural problem. So you have to, they could have just based their ruling on what the European court had said, because we're talking about 80 million euros, 100 million euros that were going to the Authors Association, because they were delighted or they were arguing, of course, that technology is going to do away with culture, but that's not true, and it's been proven that the new technology has helped many authors to stop being slaves of the big record companies. So Putasgai was also a very tricky issue, because this domain we had the domain Putasgai, so the equivalent of fucking sky, and after making us paying 36,000 euros for the sky, and this is because we were fighting for the issue of responsibility of service providers, because we cannot be held responsible for whether the content in any pages that do not belong to us are legal. But after that, we were a bit angry, and there were 3 newspapers that published that there was a number of companies that there was something like a plot against this association for authors' copyrights, and I did some research, and this is something that I was good enough to do. Everything was incredibly easy, and I could very much connect the fact that the emails and domains of private companies that belong to people in the board of directors were being managed through the sky. So it was a very clear relationship, and with that and other data, we brought that to the prosecutor's office, and there were other 2 more demands, but it was that one in 2007 that finally in 2011 led to this news item. And I was at a wedding, and I remember my friend saying, "Have you heard about what's happened with these guys?" And they were expecting me to go back to my lawyer's work, but they were talking to me about this the law enforcement that was searching their offices about what we had brought to their attention. So this went up to corruption. Every time this demand went up to a higher authority, somebody managed to stall, but this finally took the judge to ask for help to law enforcement, and the president had to go to prison. But so we did a lot of damage, and from then on they stopped fighting us. And yesterday at dinner when somebody says, I've made a picture of you, I'm going to publish it, and so on. Or in carnivals in Tenerife, they took a picture of me and they wanted to upload it, and I've always said, be careful, because I won't just complain, I will go to court, I will take you to court. So, but this had a happy ending, but the sanction they gave us was very stiff, and it was very damaging. And we also had a considerable problem with the SINDE law. We believe that it was very much unfair, the ability given to the Committee for Intellectual Property about content. And we actually challenged the appointment of Mrs. Sinde because of personal relationships. If you take the law, it doesn't make sense. And why? Because she was there for 2 years, and when you wanted to have the ruling at court, well, because she's no longer there, there's no need for a resolution. But there is something about the loss of economic income due to sitting in that position, and they wouldn't listen to us. And what happened with all of this? Well, what's funny about this in the regulation is that the court called other third parties, and they may sort of jointly demand as well. And there were 4 or 5 technological companies, and the judge said that because we had lost, we had to pay for the trial costs, and it's not the same thing paying for what we initially would have had to pay than paying for the lawyers of all of the other involved parties. And there is an article that says that that cannot be done. You cannot do that, but the Supreme Court completely ignored that. And what are they saying to us? Please stop passing with us, and stop. We're going to impeach you. And basically what we're talking about is the lack of training for this 20 years ago that would allow these professionals, law experts and judges to understand better how we work. So the Constitutional Court impeached this measure where political parties could trace the personal data of citizenships looking for their political ideologies. And we were certainly there fighting in this case. So another battle that hasn't worked, and is a pity, is the digital decree. You will all have heard about it, that allows the government to intercept networks if there is a public security problem. It used to be just if there was like a national interest, but now just just a rebellion in the streets or whatever. But we've been told now that this decree should not be annulled because, for instance, in Catalonia, all the information in Catalonia that you're taking to this digital paradise has to be in Spain, because we have the data protection law, so we don't want this data to be in other countries that do not meet the regulations that we have now. And regarding this decree, this digital decree, considering the last events that had happened in the whole country, it's very urgent to pass this law, but it doesn't say what type of circumstances, and it doesn't say whether this rule has a temporary nature or a transitionary, or so this was inconstitutional, but we've been told that's not the case. But the Ombudsman has said, I am not going to bring this to the Constitutional Court, but I am going to tell the court that they've really overdone it a bit, and that's all we've achieved so far. It's also true that I was expecting that before the Constitutional Court did this, the government was going to try to change, but I'm not so sure anymore.
It is quite complicated, and because of that, I just wanted to thank Víctor Domingo for being the motor of Sociedad de Internautas, For the moment, I'm in charge. I'm 100% of the on the association. I'm a teacher. I have my job. I do concerts like Spagherin. I have clients at my office. I have almost a bit of everything, and besides I'm training and studying a second PhD. So I don't have much available time. So we are in a period of readaptation. We welcome any proposal. We will study them. We will move them on. We're working with collaboration agreements with Inthibia, with a claim manager. I think in the end we're trying to improve, continuing Victor's labor at another pace for the moment, and leaving the level as high as he left it. So thank you very much. If you have any question. Good morning. First, thanks for this presentation, because we have on the go we have decided to switch the room and come here, so it's a complete success, because we are not much people here, but I think we are right for being here now. So I want to thank all your effort that you have been done as an influential figure of the society, because I've been in those battles. Some of us are dinosaurs here, and it's good to see your face in real time, let's say. So I wanted to ask you, how can we contribute to the association, providing our technological baggage that we may have here, and go in that way, because there are many battles to fight left. Neutrality of the network is essential. There was some news from the United States that were, but I think that the threat is still there, and like that, many others. And what we don't know, because it's not public, is what, some of us are in forums and we are more aware of it, but there are many things that are not known. Yesterday we mentioned how happy people is in their ignorance when they don't come to these kind of events. And after that, I told my wife about this, and yes, she asked me if we were talking about this, and actually yes, because it has some consequences in real life. And how can we contribute to your session? We have an email address, which is association@internautas.com. We receive all kind of emails, suggestions, even questions, even personal questions that we have left that on one hand, on the one side, because I want to reactivate that before summer. But through that email, every suggestion is welcome. We will study them in the board of directors, and we will we'll launch campaigns. I've established since November the contact with 10 experts. I created a group of 10 experts. Actually, I put 5 women in the technical aspect and 6 male lawyers. At first, it was something very natural to have these people with me, but then I realized that I almost make an equilibrium. It's like counterparted. I have many people who work or who can prepare. For instance, if there's a new piece of news, which the Asociación de Internautas post something about our opinion and experts' opinion. So this can be done for all people. So at a certain point, everyone can do this with sensitive criteria. There are many fights now going on in the best way or in the worst way. We don't want to enter into big battles, because economically we have been struck by all sides, and we think that we can do the same now that internet is not what it was, and want to manage it in a different way, but we will keep doing it. So any suggestion will be welcome. If you think that there's something that we haven't realized, or a piece of news that has been released in a media and we haven't diffused it, maybe it's because of intellectual property, or maybe it's because we haven't seen it, and everything will be welcome to launch campaigns and everything that we can. We are still waiting to assume European projects. I'm investigating in which projects we can participate. There's also the Internet Association through which we could do more things. We're in a transition moment. Everything is welcome, but let's see if for 2021 we are completely seated and with 2 or 3 fronts that are completely controlled. I think that the important thing would be to continue the work of making visible for the people who live happily in their ignorance, the reality of these things. The fact is finding people who is interested and is interested in providing services to the society, and that's what I'm working on at the moment. Let's see how we reactivate that so that all of you who are interested in this are there. So thank you very much. Is there any other question? I don't think so. I want to thank Javier, Ruth, and Monica, all of Modesto also, those who I'm seeing with the light. I don't know if I know anyone else, but thank you for being here and thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much. Now we have this coffee break until 12:30. From 12:30 we will be serving food in the main room, which requests your punctuality for this presentation that will start at 12:30. So thank you for the speech.